Hi everyone, welcome to Sports Insider. I'm Dan Labbe alongside Chris Fedor, and as always, a packed show. The Browns and Bills, preseason game number 2 tonight. We're going to talk to Tom Reed about that. We're going to talk Indians with Paul Hoynes. Bud Shaw will be here, and we have a special guest. Gilbert Gaul joins us. He wrote a book about college football, the money involved in college football, so we'll get his thoughts on that. That'll be towards the end of the show, and of course, Bud Shaw will have his weekly spinoffs. Let's get right to it, though, and bring in Tom Reed to talk Browns football. Tom, how are you? All right, Tom, game number 2, quarterback, still kind of a thing. It's not a battle, but Johnny Manziel looked a little bit better last week, at least compared to what we saw last season. What do you want to see out of Johnny tonight? What's that next step forward for him?
I think there's any secret. Just continue to progress, continue to be able to, go through progressions, try to stay in the pocket, play ball forward. Seems like they try to roll him out a lot. Just continue to be a little bit better. It's always hard in these, you're only getting a series or two. I guess the big thing you'd like to see is then giving him. He got 5 series in the last game. One of them was because of a fumble punt. So I just want to see him play a little bit more. And the fact that they're actually down the quarterback will mean that you probably will get more action along with that goes as the game goes on. So just taking advantage of his opportunities.
Tom, going back to the practices between the Browns and the Bills, do you think the Browns got out of those practices what they wanted to get out of them?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, they're very controlled, so that neither offense was very good against the defense. And this were kind of predictable. Certainly the Browns, one other thing that I wrote about this earlier in the week is that I don't know the Browns will play many better defenses, especially defensive fronts, than they'll play tonight against the Bills. One of the things you talk about, what do you want to get out of it? This game, you want to get your quarterback out of the game, not hurt. The Bills are as good a defensive front as there is in the NFL. They were right among the top defenses in the league last year. And I can tell you, there was a play in one of the 11-on-11 scrimmages where Mario Williams came through unblocked. He would just absolutely killed Josh Allen every game. So this is a big catch for the offensive line, a big catch for the running backs, catching blitzing guys coming through. This is a very, very good team, and I understand the
Tom, you look at the Browns and Bills, and they're two teams that are kind of trying to do similar things this year. Obviously, the Bills are much more talented than the Browns, maybe except at quarterback. It's about equal there. But was it good for the Browns to go against a team that sort of wants to do the same thing as them, play really good defense, run the football, kind of control things on offense?
Yeah, I think the offense, the Browns offense, they got a little bit more out of it in the sense of you're going to use really good players there. When you flip it around on any skin, that's not Ben Roethlisberger or Peyton Manning or anything that the case. Bill can't play his own quarterback as yet. So, you can make the argument that you could probably pick a better team there. But the Browns held their own defensively, even with just the laundry list of players out of the lineup right now, especially in the secondary. They're very fortunate the season's not starting right now because they have a lot of guys out of the lineup.
Who was the Browns' standout during those practices against Buffalo, Tom?
I don't necessarily think there was one guy that really, I don't think there was one guy that really stood out to me. I think you have to go back in the film, but different guys did different things well. Obviously the one guy that really struggled on the first day was Justin Gilbert, which is well reported. But I don't think any one guy you said, wow, that he's really increased his chances of either making the team or being a big part of it. And Ian Shelton continues to be so impressive to people, everyone we talk to. It's kind of a weird. We're kind
Tom, looking ahead to tonight's game, and a guy that, look, we got to see him on the field at some point, Terrell Pryor, still dealing with that hamstring. He got back on the field over the weekend, struggled with it again in Rochester. Are we going to see this guy tonight? And what happens if, this thing kind of goes into preseason game number 3 or even 4, and we still haven't seen this guy play a kind of real-ish game?
Yeah, I'd be surprised if he played tonight, given his pop back, or he's sort of popped from the hamstring. But I don't think that it will. I don't think it's him tonight. But he's really putting a lot of pressure on both sides here, both Pryor and the Browns, because I think the Browns would, if this guy can show them anything, I think he's going to be their 7th guy. I mean, if they're willing to take 7 guys, it's still hard for me to think that they would cut a draft pick in this mail. Maybe they would, but a guy that's picked, fourth round or whatever, he was picked, it'd be hard to imagine that they would get rid of him. So now you've got 6 that you think are going to make the team, and then Pryor becomes 7. And again, the other thing for you, he can also be your emergency backup quarterback. If you dress, if you have 2 guys hurt, he can do a lot of trick plays. But he has to get it out there and show them at least he can make a few plays in a game.
I know it's strange, but does Connor Shaw's thumb injury and the possibility of him being on IR for the entire season, does that help Terrell Pryor's chances in a way?
Yeah, I mean, again, go back to the idea of, it doesn't happen a lot, but to have that emergency quarterback, you've got the guy that can go in there, and I know again, they're very good, that's why he's switching positions, but he's somebody that can go in there and give you some plays if we're, having safety. And I can think of a game 2 or 3 years ago in Denver where we got hurt and both we and I think it was Coleman Boyd at the time we got hurt.
Yeah.
They barely were able to finish the game. I got hurt late in the game, but they were in bad shape there. So that is one thing. Obviously, it's not the thing you're thinking of, but it certainly, to answer your question, yeah, it certainly doesn't hurt his chances.
All right, Tom, talk to you later.
Thank you.
Tom Reed, it says something about this team's playmakers, I think, that a guy like Terrell Pryor can come in, get hurt, basically not be on the field, and he's still, if he can just get out there and show you like one thing, he's going to make the team.
Right. I was having a conversation with my buddy the other day, and I was thinking back, and I'm like, well, this is a unique situation. You've got somebody who's going from quarterback to wide receiver. He doesn't have to do anything in the preseason. He doesn't have to do a lot in training camp. And the thought still is that he's going to make the squad. And I think it just goes to show you that the Browns have a long way to go when it comes to that wide receiver spot. A problem spot for this team since, 2007, Braylon Edwards, when he had that monster year?
Yeah. It's been slim pickings at wide receiver, and Terrell Pryor could be the beneficiary of that. Let's go ahead and switch gears and talk some Indians baseball. We bring in Paul Hoynes, our Indians beat reporter. Hoynesy, what's going on?
What's up, Dan? How you doing, man?
Doing well. All right, Hoynesy, we got to talk about Trevor Bauer. I know he doesn't love to answer questions about his performance, as he showed a couple games ago, but what's going on with Trevor Bauer right now? He got off such a good start, and now it's just falling apart for him.
Yeah, I think you're seeing a young pitcher just kind of stuck in his ways. This guy has made some adjustments, the last couple of years, but I think Francona was talking about him last night and just saying, he's made progress, but this is a pretty stubborn kid and he's got his own ideas about pitching, and sometimes that doesn't work. He's made some adjustments. He's made some concessions to the way the Indians want him to pitch, but I think he's still got his own ideas, and one of them is pitching inside. And but when you're behind in the count and you pitch inside with bad location, that's not a good idea. So I think that seems to be the hurdle they're trying to reach a compromise on.
Hoynesy, obviously this has been a frustrating season for a lot of different people. How is Terry Francona handling the struggles of this team down the stretch here?
I think he's handled it pretty well. Francona's big kind of one of his better qualities as a manager is you show up every day as the same guy, and he seems to be handling this is just like he did, the last 2 years when he had a winning season. The personality doesn't change. The way he talks about players doesn't change. So, in that regard, I think, he's done a good job. I mean, I think he's handled it well. He's also made some concessions here. This is a guy that's had 10 straight winning seasons, and when Antonetti came to him and said, we're basically pulling the plug on this season, when they started trading Bourne and Swisher and Murphy and everybody else, I think that took him. It went against his nature, and it took Antonetti a while to convince him. But now that he's bought in, now you're seeing Jose Ramirez starting in left field at Fenway Park with the Green Monster behind him. So, I think he's being a little flexible. He's showing he can, change with the times. But deep down, I think this is grating against him.
Hoynesy, it's only August, but we got to start looking ahead to next season, and it seems like every off season, it's kind of the off season of ifs. Well, if this guy bounces back, if that guy does what we expected him to do, can the Indians rely on that line again this offseason, or do they need to be more aggressive, especially now that they've unloaded those contracts of Swisher and Michael Bourne?
That's a great question, Dan, and I have not had a chance to talk to these guys. I've been through this before where they've offloaded contracts and everyone says, oh, they got all this money to spend, and they end up spending like they did this past offseason, like $10 million. And, I'm afraid that's what we might be looking at again here. And you've just got an ownership that is, very cautious, very conservative, and they just got their butt kicked on two huge contracts, two of the biggest free agent contracts they've ever signed, and you had to trade them both away just to and send between 11 and 15 million dollars to the Braves just to get out from under a little bit. So I don't see them going hog wild in the free agent market again, and I think that's probably the easiest way to get better, or at least appease the fan base. As we've obviously seen, that's not the best way to get better. If the guys you pick, all of a sudden get old in a hurry. So, I don't know. This is going to be a very interesting offseason. But like you said, they cannot sit under and twiddle their thumbs. They've got to make an impact this offseason.
All right, Hoynesy, we appreciate you taking the time.
Thanks, guys.
All right, yeah, I mean, every offseason, right? It's, if Carlos Santana bounces back, or if Yan Gomes plays like he did 2 years ago,
right,
that stuff could happen, but that doesn't energize a fan base, and
right,
there's no guarantees that those things will happen.
Yeah, and I'm right there with you 100%. It's now you've got this opportunity. You found somebody magically to take both Michael Bourne and Nick Swisher off your hands. So now it's about capitalizing. And it's funny, I wrote a piece for cleveland.com about revisiting the 2014 NFL draft trade between the Browns and the Bills. And at the time, it was looked at as a heist because the Browns got the assets that they got. But the other part of that is you have to use those assets the right way. So for Chris Antonetti, step one, done. You got somebody to take Swisher and you got somebody to take Bourne. But now what do you do after you've got that money freed up? That's really going to determine whether this Swisher-Bourne trade turns out to be a good thing or not.
All right, let's go ahead and bring in our next guest. He is a two-time Pulitzer Prize winner. His name is Gilbert Gaul, and he wrote a little bit about college football, a lot about college football, actually a whole book called $Billion Ball, A Journey Through the Big Money Culture of College Football. He joins us via phone. Thanks for taking the time, Gilbert.
Sure, glad to be here. Thank you.
Okay, let's get right to it. We all know that college football is a big money game. Of course, here in Ohio, there's Ohio State right down the road from us. Your take on college football and the money behind it and how it's affecting universities as a whole.
Well, that's a big question. My take in a few words would be that there's been extraordinary growth in college football, that the business model of college football, it's now football first. The financial model drives everything in the athletic departments these days. And it determines everything from what sports are played, how many are offered, how many scholarships are handed out, who gets them, how big a salary the head coach gets, and so on and so forth. So that's what I'm interested in, and that's what my book is about. I looked, instead of looking at things like scandals and the supposed glories of college football, which is what most books are about college football. I was interested in looking at the economy of college football and how it affects universities. How so many of our largest and prestigious universities these days are using college football as their primary brand, as opposed to education, and how it changes the culture of those schools. So that's what I was curious about, and that's what I spent 2 years looking at.
Gilbert, when you think about something that happened here locally, a university like Akron having to shut down the baseball program because for a variety of reasons, what does that say to you when that kind of thing happens?
Well, so what's interesting about this economy of college football is it's an economy of haves and have-nots. You have the 5 super conferences like the SEC and the Big Ten, to just name 2 of them, that are fabulously wealthy, make extraordinary sums, have all the big television contracts with ESPN. Most of them have set up, the conferences have set up their own separate digital and television networks, like Big Ten Network, and now the SEC has its own network. They just, for the moment, are making extraordinary sums of money from football. Then you have these other 60 or so schools, including Akron and the schools in the MAC and the Sun Belt and the MAC West, or the Mountain West. And those schools don't have the big television contracts. You know, they don't, generally speaking, have the huge stadiums. They generally are not getting huge amounts of money from tickets or the seat donations. And so, they're losing millions and millions of dollars annually trying to play at the highest level of football, Division I level football. And it has a huge effect on the university. The Akron story is sort of apocryphal, if you will. And Akron's a place that, by the way, that I spent some time studying and went out and interviewed the former president, Proenza, in 2013. So I know a fair amount about what's gone on there. And it's just a classic example of a school trying to play over its head. It just doesn't have the money or the wherewithal or the history, for that matter, to really be playing at that level. It probably ought to be playing at the next level down. But like so many others of these schools, they insist at playing at the highest level. They feel like they're not a real university if they don't have a D1 level football program. And the consequence at Akron, it's really sad. It's really sad if you're a baseball player, if you're one of the 213 or 215 people who've been laid off, some of the programs that are being shuttered. Think about it. Football was untouched in all of that, just left completely untouched. Yeah. And yet football at Akron is, how to put this politely, not very successful. There's 64 and 114 since 2000. And that includes 3 seasons when they went 3-33. Oof. Think about that. They're just not very good at it. They don't make any money at it. They're losing, numbers are a little bit tricky, but by my estimates, they're losing somewhere in the neighborhood of between $4 and $7 million a year, not including the debt service on that beautiful $60 million stadium they opened in 2009. That is, for the most part, half empty. If you look at this, I asked Proenza this too. I mean, if you look at this from the standpoint of business, it makes absolutely no sense, and yet they insist on playing at that level.
And Gilbert, of course, this goes to the next question. One of these universities, at some point, you would think, an Akron, a Kent State, one of the other non-BCS schools around the country, would have to make a decision. Do we still want a football program? And a lot of people look at that and say, no, you have to have it. But
right.
Do you think some university out there will be a leader in this front and say, you know what, no, we don't need it? And then what impact do you think that would have on that school?
Well, it's happened at a number of schools in the past, Northeastern, Boston University, some other places. that either, scaled way back or else they eliminate the programs altogether. And, they're perfectly fine universities. I don't think if you ask the students there whether they feel like they're being shortchanged because they don't have a football team, that they're going to say, oh, yeah, I'm going to transfer next week and go to Ohio State or wherever. So I think that kind of impact, that kind of self-fulfilling notion or that loop of thinking that, unless we have a BCS level football program that somehow we're not a serious university is just absurd. To go to your question, look what happened at UAB, Alabama, Birmingham. They tried to, the president wanted to shut down the football team there, and in fact, succeeded initially, and then all hell broke loose. Now, you can kind of argue, well, it's the South, it's Alabama, college football's different down there, and it is on some level, but still, it's just incredibly difficult to shut down these programs once you start them. Here's another school, New Mexico State University, just has an abysmal record at football. It's another one of these schools that, it just doesn't win year after year after year. The record is woeful, but they insist on continuing to play at that level. They lose millions of dollars doing it. It has a huge impact on the university. I interviewed the president there, Gary Carruthers, and and asked him that question: why don't you shut it down? And what he said to me, and I'd heard this from other presidents as well, is, look, it's in the hands of the board. We're a small rural, or not, actually a large rural state, in the case of New Mexico. We need to have something. And if we tried to do this, in so many words, what he said is, they'd have my head. And that's true. You hear it from the presidents. If you go and try to shut down the football program, I'm going to lose my job.
All right, Gilbert Gaul is our guest. Gilbert, this is a great discussion. Obviously, we could probably go on for forever talking about this issue. If you want to read more, his book is $1 Billion Ball, A Journey Through the Big Money Culture of College Football. We appreciate you taking out the time.
Okay, thank you.
It is interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Look, I went to Kent State, and that's a campus that is pretty close knit, and people follow the sports teams. The basketball team had a great run there while I was there, but guess how many shirts you see, Ohio State shirts? And that's who people root for,
Tons.
even when they go to Kent State.
Yeah.
Because the football program wasn't that good when people were there.
Right.
An interesting discussion. Check out the book. A lot of good facts in there from our two-time Pulitzer Prize-winning guest. And now let's go to another guy who probably should have a few Pulitzers. And I'm outraged that you don't.
I wasn't expecting that lead in.
Bud Shaw.
Thanks, guys. Well, I thought I saw Dwayne Bowe in action the other day, and then I remembered I was on a golf course, and there were a lot of older guys in floppy hats milling around. When we last heard from Bowe, he was saying Josh McCown had the potential to be a top 5 quarterback, presumably meaning in the NFL. He was saying Joe Hayden was the best cornerback since Champ Bailey. And he was all but guaranteeing Terrell Pryor a place on the roster. Since then, about all we can say for sure is that Pryor has a spot reserved on the trainer's table. Admit it, we would have felt better if Bowe had just stayed in his own lane and simply predicted when he might suit up next in a game. This is reminiscent of Nate Burleson's training camp from a year ago, a veteran signing who made himself scarce on the practice field. That similarity prompted one cleveland.com commenter to wonder if the Browns might cut Bowe since they parted ways with Burleson. And I'd say that's probably unlikely based on how much they spent signing Bowe and the Kansas City connection he shares with Ray Farmer. If Bowe is productive once the season begins, nobody will care that he stood around at training camp day after day after day. If he's not, well, as this next commenter says, we'll all miss Miles Austin. The Browns, by the way, aren't the only NFL team dealing with injuries. It's good to keep that in mind. In Carolina, wide receiver Kelvin Benjamin is gone for the year with a much more serious injury than the ones keeping Pryor and presumably Bowe out of practice at the midway point of the preseason. So maybe a preventative strategy is the best strategy. But in case it's not a strategy, it must be comforting for the Browns medical people to know that they can always turn to cleveland.com for injury advice. Here you have it. You sit down, you grab your toes for 5 minutes, and voila, you're an NFL Iron Man. What could be easier? A much more worrisome strategy is how the Browns have surrounded their quarterback with passing game weapons since Farmer has been calling the shots. The wide receiver position isn't exactly an afterthought, but the Browns don't seem to put much value in big, dynamic receivers who can go the distance or come down with jump balls in the corner of the end zone. At least not ones who have played the position before. Will this year be different? Well, Bo caught 0 TD passes last year. Brian Hartline, who looks like the Browns' best receiver, caught 2. Pryor, if he makes the team, which I think he will be looking for his first NFL catch. You'd like to see one season in which the Browns' receiving corps has at least as much chance to be dynamic as it does to be pedestrian, or worse than pedestrian. What's the term I'm looking for? Oh, right. As one commenter told another in correcting a previous typo, you spelled dumpster fire wrong, guys.
Are you telling me that you're not sold on Dwayne Bowe being the answer? A guy who hasn't caught a touchdown pass since that playoff game
you know,
against Indianapolis?
when they made that deal, a guy that I trust in Kansas City, not that he's an NFL personnel man or a scout, but a guy that I know has been watching football for a long time, called and said he didn't get any separation at all. He says, I know they're going to look and they're going to say none of the wide receivers caught touchdown passes in Kansas City, but he didn't get any separation. It was hard. You never saw him running open. One thing we saw last year with Kyle Shanahan's offense, whatever else you thought of it, were wide receivers running open. Now, Shanahan's not there. We have to measure what this new offense is going to be, and the guy calling the plays, what his acumen is going to be in that category. But it looks like they're in another slog again. You're hoping that possession receivers can do what Hartline did last week, where he catches a ball on the sidelines and he's able to turn it upfield for 8 or 10 yards. But that's about the ceiling for those kind of players.
It's such a good thing, too, that Brian Hartline came this offseason as well, like the free agent deals that they made. Because if you took Dwayne Bowe out of the equation and you didn't have a guy like Brian Hartline, then you'd be talking about young Taylor Gabriel, young Vince Mailey, Terrell Pryor switching from quarterback to wide receiver. Who would they turn to and learn from? And I know you have coaches for that kind of thing, but the Browns have talked all offseason about how better the quarterback room is and how they love some of these leaders that they have in different positions. If you didn't have Brian Hartline, you couldn't look to Dwayne Bowe because he's sitting there riding a bike the whole time. And that's part of the reason why they brought him in here, to be one of the leaders of that wide receiver group.
You know, and I maybe it's my supposition here, or my projection, but I get the impression that they're counting on Duke Johnson being a big part of their passing game. That's another huge projection.
That's
I mean,
another
the guy
guy that
has
has to
another
stay
guy
on the
that hasn't
field,
been
too.
able to stay on the
Right.
field. So, you know, I wrote the other day that I wasn't sure if it was worse that they seem to be counting on Pryor and Duke Johnson, or it's worse that they don't seem to care that they don't have any dynamic players offensively.
Although I'll say this for Pryor, he does one thing that Vince Mailey, Rob Hausler, a couple other guys on the roster don't do. He catches the football. When it's around him, he usually catches the football. He hasn't done it in traffic yet,
Okay.
but he catches the football.
You and I could go out to the back here, right here at cleveland.com, and we just throw it around. No defenders, not hearing footsteps.
Well, that's why.
Okay, that's fine. Tell that to Vince Mailey and Rob Hausler. That's my point.
Okay, I got you. That's why I was so disappointed about this latest tweak of the hamstring, because I wanted to see him finally go across the middle against a good defense and know that there are guys like Whitner on the other team who are waiting to crush him. And I think that's a huge thing. Not just whether you get up from that first hit, but whether you can keep your concentration and want to be a wide receiver after that first hit.
Ask Greg Little about it. He had the size, he had the strength, he had the speed. Man hated going across the middle and taking a hit. He did.
We'll see what happens again. It says a lot about the Browns wide receiver core that Terrell Pryor, who hasn't played a preseason game and probably won't after tonight, still has a chance to make this roster.
Ray Farmer says it's overrated. Dan, Seattle can do it.
I guess. All right. Thanks to Tom Reed, Paul Hoynes, of course, Gilbert Gaul, Bud Shaw. He's Chris Fedor. I'm Dan Labbe. Thanks for watching.